I'm Mangino. Welcome to the Mangino Talks Pittsburgh podcast. I've been a radio talk show host for half of my life and nearly half of that right here in Pittsburgh. And so on my podcast, we talk about everything that matters to us all, from current events to Pittsburgh history, social issues to sports, politics, to practical day-to-day life, and so much of that coming together with what's happening in Harrisburg right now over the budget stalemate between the governor, House Democrats, and Senate Republicans. And it really comes down to this PASS program, this voucher program, if you will, so that a small number of students that are in absolutely miserably failing school districts will be able to have an opportunity to go to a school of the parents' choice that will give their children a better opportunity for academic growth and then ultimately a better life as a result of that. One of the arguments against this is that it's tax dollars going to private schools, and you have public schools that are just woefully underfunded. And there's a legitimate argument for that there should be more dollars that are set aside for public schools. But the reality is this: in this budget, according to the governor, there's $1 billion in new money. The money that would be set aside for this voucher program has zero impact whatsoever on public schools. Now, some may argue, well, the $100 million could go to public schools. It could, but it's already $1 billion that's set up in the budget for this. And this was something that the governor says he wants, and he has said he's wanted for years now. Republicans in the Senate, it's something that they want. And what it's come down to is this idea that the governor expressed his interest, the Senate Republicans expressing their interest, and somehow wires being crossed, or at least connections not being made to the Democrats in the House to ensure that they were on board with this. And what's interesting to note is that, remember, there's a one-vote majority with the Democrats in the House. I believe with all that's within me that if Democrat leadership allowed the budget bill to be voted on with the $100 million in it, that it would pass out of the House, that it would get all of Republican support, and there would be a few Democrats at least that would vote in favor of this budget bill to give those dollars to those parents with those children in those horribly performing school districts. Now, the argument being made back and forth from the Democrats and from the governor, Democrats saying that the Senate Republicans need to come back to Harrisburg and allow the budget bill to be signed, and so that we can have the formalities of that because they have to be there when the lieutenant governor, who's also the president of the Senate, signs the legislation and then sends it off to the governor. Has to be done that way. And that because Senate Republicans are saying that they have no intention of coming back to Harrisburg anytime before early September, that they are holding this process up. Senate Republicans, on the other hand, are saying, hold on, not only are we upset about these negotiations that we had in good faith with the governor, that all of a sudden are being counted for nothing. We also have other bills that need to be addressed on how to actually spend these dollars. So there's a lot of negotiation that can take place, not only on how to spend the dollars that are inside the budget, but also they're attempting to try to get a commitment from House Democrats to allow the $100 million to stand, to remain, that there wouldn't be this call on the governor to have a line item veto. The governor feeling as though he needs to do this in order to keep his Democrats in the House happy. And the most important thing to politicians, the money people who get them in power and keep them there, you got to keep them happy too. And what I mean by that is the teachers union and the unions that are adamantly opposed to this. And there's a lot of money that could otherwise come to the governor that may not come to the governor in future elections, especially as he is having an eye on the White House What would that mean if a major union nationally would not financially want to back his candidacy for the Democrats for the presidency? He's weighing that political calculus into all of this as well. So he says now it's time for the Republicans and the Democrats to work this thing out. And if they ultimately do, then he will be able to say, well, the Republicans and Democrats work this out. I'm just going to go forward and signing something into law that they agreed to. So you can't hold it personally against me. I'm guessing that's the angle he's going to try to go with. But once you throw out that you can line item veto something, even if there is collective will to do it with the Republicans and the Democrats in Harrisburg, you still deal with the idea that there could be political pushback. Now, the Democrats insisting that Republicans move forward on this are not operating in good faith at this point either. There's a political gamesmanship that they are manipulating and trying to work into all of this. Let's put the pressure on the Republicans and make it look as though we're all the good guys, right? That we're the ones that are really representing the will of the people. But in reality, they're not, because the will of the people of the Commonwealth is to have a voucher program similar to what is in this current legislation, this past legislation in the general budget. Overwhelming majority of Republicans support this. Independents and, yes, Democrats too support the idea of having this funding in place. And so now we're at a point to where there's this ongoing political battle back and forth. Story in the Post-Gazette, Senator Joe Pittman, Republican of Indiana, telling Representative Matt Bradford, Democrat of Montgomery, and the House Majority Leader that there are many items in the $46.55 billion spending bill that require additional legislation. And it's those code bills that actually go forward and give the power to spend those dollars, not only the power to spend them, but how to then spend those dollars. And what he wants to know is, please, he says, let me know if you plan to vote on any of the remaining budget implementation legislation, because he's intending to negotiate back and forth with that. I mean, if you're not willing to vote on that and you have no real plans coming up, then there's nothing for us to do. He also goes on to say, furthermore, please give me a clear understanding whether you plan to coordinate with the governor and speak as a unified voice in future discussions, as was previously thought to be the case throughout budget negotiations prior to June 30th. Now, what's interesting to note is the term thought, and you have to be very careful when you read statements like this, that they use words specifically. And what this tells me is that there was a presumption that Senate Republicans had that what the governor wanted, the House Democrats were going to give him, without having a concrete, definitive statement from House Democrats and leadership that, yes, what you negotiate with the governor, we're on board with. They just presumed. That's why they said previously thought. But they want to get this clear now. So as we move forward on negotiations from this point forward, are you on board? Are you allowing the governor to be your chief negotiator? Are you going to go in line with what it is that he says? Or are we doing three-way negotiations on this entire thing? Very fair question. Very fair question. Bradford said that Republicans are continuing to stand in the way of funding for schools, county human services, including drug and alcohol treatment, and kids in foster care and other critical programs and services that support Pennsylvanians. Well, the argument can clearly be that Democrats are doing the same thing, because it's the House Democrats that put pressure on the governor to where he would then say, I'll line item veto this $100 million that I otherwise want, but because I don't want you holding up the budget process, I'll go ahead and make that promise. I realize that he made that promise, and now where we are is a Senate Republicans doing what they can to negotiate a better budget deal at this point. But it's because of the stubbornness of House Democrats that brought us to this point in the first place, and especially the holdup of that $1 billion in new funding to public schools. Bradford said that there was no need or rationale to not send the bill to the governor. Further negotiations are the rationale. And if the shoe was on the other foot, they'd be running the same game. They would be making the same claims. Absolutely. Shapiro, on his side, is saying that it's now the responsibility of the House and Senate to find a way to work together. And so it's almost as though Shapiro says, listen, okay, I'm washing my hands of this. You guys figure this all out. It's all on the two of you. Which makes me wonder, to what extent is he playing political chess here? And there are a lot of references to chess and checkers and who's playing what and all of that. Maybe it's a short game. Maybe it's the long game. I'm not sure exactly how to categorize it. But if the governor is saying it's now up to House Democrats and Senate Republicans to negotiate something, maybe there's an aspect to where he knows that by doing this, he's going to force those two parties to come together. Maybe the total appropriation isn't $100 million this budget year. Maybe the compromise is $50 million. But it's something that Senate Republicans and House Democrats can negotiate and work up amongst themselves, and then he comes out looking pretty clean in all of this, right? There's also an interesting note here about what is it going to take to get the Senate to come back. And it seems as though that it's really up to Senate President Pro Tem Kim Ward out of Westmoreland, that she's the one that has the authority, the power, the responsibility for calling the Senate back before September. And it doesn't look as though she's in any mood to do that, because she too is a strong supporter of the scholarship concept. And a spokesperson for Ms. Ward, Erica Wright, said the Senate was on a 24-hour call, meaning lawmakers could be asked to return to Harrisburg on 1 day's notice. And what is wanted at this point is people making commitments that things are going to be done. And I don't blame the Republicans for wanting to wait on this. I just don't. And I don't understand fully, outside of Shapiro wanting to have this being dealt with and arranged by the lawmakers, because his claim that he made that he wasn't interested in having this be a protracted issue, that he wanted to see this be addressed quickly when it comes to the budget. Well, the budget isn't being addressed quickly. It's not even close to being quick. It's taking its good old time because of the Senate Republicans wanting to say, listen, no, you're not doing this to us, right? Shapiro said in a statement when he went forward with the veto, knowing that the two chambers will not reach consensus at this time to enact pass and unwilling to hold up our entire budget process over this issue, I will line item veto the full $100 million appropriation, and it will not be part of this budget bill. So I'm wondering, to what extent is Governor Shapiro being completely honest with the people of Pennsylvania when he says that in order to have the budget process go forward, and his unwillingness to hold up our entire budget process? Well, that threat of a line item veto just held up the entire budget process. And it looks as though it may very well happen all the way through the rest of summer. And then we're just sitting back and waiting, wondering what bills are going to be paid. How consistently will they be paid? Where are they going to get the dollars to then pay them? At what point does it really affect the quality of life of the people of Pennsylvania? Because right now, I'm not sure that there's a lot of political pressure on Democrats to come to the table and negotiate with Republicans. And I would argue that there's almost zero pressure on Senate Republicans to come and negotiate. Because Senate Republicans, most of them are in really secure districts. The likelihood of Republicans losing control of the Senate, it's not very high. However, the Democrats hold the slimmest of majorities with one vote. Those districts could easily go back to Republican control once again. And the Democrats better not, for their own sake, overplay their hand that they have too much influence and control when in reality they have a hair's breadth. And like I mentioned earlier, I would argue that this thing should come to a vote. Democrats in leadership within the House should allow this to come to a vote. And what do the representatives say when it comes to having this $100 million included in the budget? And I believe it passes. All the Republicans vote for it, and a considerable number of Democrats vote for it. So what's really happening, the people who are holding up this budget process are not the Republicans that negotiated in good faith with the governor to come forward with a budget proposal. The people who are really holding this thing up are leaders within the House, within the Democratic Party. That small handful number of people that are trying to overplay their hand in all of this. So if there are phone calls to be made, if there are emails to be sent, if there are handwritten letters to be delivered, they should all be directed at House Democrats for them to put the pressure on their leadership to allow this vote to take place, and especially those phone calls, emails, and letters to the leadership within the party, especially Representative Matt Bradford, Democrat of Montgomery. Thank you for listening to the show. Be sure to click on the subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. For more on me and the show, make sure you visit manginotalks.com. If there's a topic that you would like me to talk about or a guest that you would like me to have on, send me an email. It's mangino@manginotalks.com. Follow me on your favorite social media platform by using @ManginoTalks. And then once you find me, please like, follow, subscribe, and share the pages with your friends and your family. And thanks again for listening to the Mangino Talks podcast.
I'm so scared about the future, and I wanna talk to you. Oh, I wanna talk to you.